Good morning. We'll officially call this meeting to order. And second item on the agenda is a public hearing in regards to the public documents in the back. Has everybody found, we do have in the back documents, everybody got a copy of all that? The proposed budget for the fiscal year 2017 and 18. Mr. Hewitt, you want to say anything before we allow people to speak? Where's Mr. Hewitt?
Yes, I've got a few slides to talk about. This is the public hearing for the fiscal year 17-18, and for folks that may not be familiar with the government's fiscal year, that is the budget year that begins 1 July of 2017 in about 3 weeks and ending 30 June of 2018. I want to talk about 4 main points this morning to recap the schedule and the process that the board has followed this year, discuss some of the highlights as you may wish to, also go through the funds that we will have this coming year, and touch briefly on our capital improvement plan. I got new glasses, but evidently I didn't make the print big enough to see that screen from over here. But our schedule, we started back in January at the commissioner's request, and have followed through several steps there to include workshops, both revenues and expenses, including the canal dredging working group. The budget message has been out now for about 3.5 weeks. It was published on the 15th. That brings us to today's public hearing on the 9th. I have a couple of footnotes that I wanted to scale for the commissioners. Our agenda says consideration and possible action on the ordinance that's in front of you today. Our schedule speaks to that ordinance consideration being done at the regular meeting. It's of course, it's at the commissioner's discretion, but technically the advertising requirements and all the dates are in sync, and you could act on it if you chose to do so. My desire is for you to go ahead and act on it, because I'm driving NASCAR. I'm looking at the next curve down there, but it's just wanted to make sure that that was was registered with the commissioners. And of course, we have to have the budget adopted before the new fiscal year begins. The budget as presented maintains a 22-cent tax rate. It appropriates, in accordance by law, all of our debt services. And also I'd like to mention that our long-term obligations, primarily for the sewer contractual arrangements that we have with Brunswick County, those are really debt service obligations, even though they're contracts. But the budget does appropriate those. The Central Reach Project, New Town Hall, the Emergency Operations Center, both BB&T installment financing agreements, and our installment financing arrangements for our police department vehicles. It amends the capital improvement plan. I've got a slide on that I'll go into a little bit of detail on. Our estimated general fund balance is approximately 50%, and of that, the unassigned amount is approximately 30%. Some of the highlights from the budget is that the benefit package is retained at its current level. The budget provides for a 3% merit possibility raise. There are increases for the different way of contracting for our sanitation work. Our canal dredging program is perpetuated. FEMA Matthew reimbursements are included as the budget was amended this year. And I'll speak in more detail to that also. The new beach ranger program has been stood up and instituted and rolls forward, and there is money included for the Shallow Draft Inlet 5 easements. By fund, the general fund tops out above $3.3 million. Our water and sewer fund is right at $5.1 million, and that includes the first lift station work or rebuild, retool, whatever we want to call it. The B-Part fund, I want to make sure that folks understand that that $8.9 million, that includes the $6 million FEMA grant reimbursement program, and I've rolled that program forward just as it was approved by FEMA. Now, some of those reimbursements will be captured this year, and some of them will be captured next year. I do not think that we're going to capture all $6 million of those reimbursements. I think the federal program is very liberal in their costing and the programming, but suffice it to say, it establishes a framework for us to recapture a whole lot of expenses that had been incurred in getting the Central Reach project permitted. But I just want to make sure that
David,
folks understand that.
when you said this year, next year, you make sure that's clear. You talking about calendar years? Or are you talking about fiscal?
I'm talking about fiscal year, because the board amended the budget for this $6 million, and we've been working on that, so some of those funds will be posted to the current year's budget. Some of the reimbursements will be posted to the next, this budget that we're talking about now.
This coming fiscal year?
That's correct.
Okay.
Suffice it to say, all of those reimbursements will be returned to the B-Part fund for allocation as the board chooses to at a future date. Canal dredging is programmed to accrue about $2 million, and the total of all funds together is about $19.5 million. The capital improvement plan, the 10-year plan, is projected at about $12 million. This will be the third year of the streets resurfacing program. As a matter of fact, we just finished Jordan, Marsh Walk, and Schooner. The capital improvement plan provides for the almost $1.5 million this year for the water and sewer improvements, which include the first lift station retooling. It also provides for the payments on the next year's payment on the water tower rehab, and then the possible construction of a second water tower in year 5. There are funds in the professional services line item that will provide funds for engineering services that will scope what those requirements are, but I went ahead and included in year 5 a second water tower. Where it's going to be, how big it'll be, those kinds of things still have to be determined. It also provides for construction of the terminal groin in year 2 and the canal dredging in the 18-19 year time frame, and then also again in year 6, I believe. So that's the 4 items that I wanted to go over for the public hearing. That was the schedule, the highlights of the budget, the different funds totaling about $19.5 million, and also the capital improvement plan that pegs at about $12 million. That's all I have.
Okay. Question, Mr. Hewitt, in regards to the agenda, are we now in order for the public to speak? Or what's, you know,
Clerk says yes, sir.
pardon me?
Clerk says yes.
Okay, is that what the commissioners understand and agree to? Sure. Okay, so with that being said, anyone in the audience that would like to address the commissioners, if you would raise your hand and come and speak in the microphone at the podium and state your question or your concerns or whatever you want to say about the upcoming proposed budget. Anybody want to speak? Yes, sir, come on, share your knowledge with us.
Mark Fleschauer, 125 Lions Paw. I've served on the audit committee for the past 2 tenures of audit committees. But one subject that comes up and that traditionally we seem to be lagging behind other communities is our existing cash balance. And recognize that the community obviously has the ability to quickly raise funds as exhibited last year. We raised the taxes 45% and in short order raised considerable funds. But I think the main concern we have, of course, is hurricanes. And we talk about that cash balance, 30%, represents, what, about 3.5 months. But in reality, our monthly expenditures would likely dramatically increase in the event of a hurricane. I would like the board to consider adapting some sort of resolution that establishes a minimum cash balance unencumbered that the town should get to. And I think it should at least be 40%, and maybe higher, and recognize it may take a couple of years to get to that balance. But I would urge the committee to consider that.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else want to speak? Well, everybody's happy with the tax rate? Okay. We have to have you speak in the microphone for the recordation of the minutes and so forth.
Really, this is just a question, probably more for David. Could you explain the criteria that you used to put items in your capital plan?
Can you get me a little closer
Yeah.
with specifics?
Yeah, how do you determine what items you're gonna put in your capital improvement plan and what items, I'm having a hard time figuring out why some items show up in here and some items don't. You know, from an accounting perspective, actually.
Last year was the first year that we even developed a capital improvement plan.
Right.
This year is a further refinement of that. We've tried to use a thumbnail sketch of what we think is big. Is there a dollar amount threshold on what that is? We haven't used that. There is no type of above $5,000 or anything like that. They're probably in discussions, and this is relative to sewer, and items that are not as, or are more readily programmable, like streets. Those are a natural fit, especially since we have adopted a practice of about a penny's worth of streets improvement.
Right.
That's $100,000 a year. So that's a natural, an easy fit. Some of the equipment purchases in sewer. So is it anecdotal to some extreme? Yes. or is it operational? We usually try to keep the operational things in the current year's budget, so that's how we did it.
So then there's not really a set criteria of what you're saying, that these items are capital items and we're gonna capitalize them, depreciate them, nothing like that?
No.
Okay.
There's no quantifiable conscious effort that we've made to do that type of thing.
Okay, well, I was just wondering because, like, normally, if you purchase a piece of equipment or a vehicle or something like that, then you put it in your capital plan. I know some of our stuff is leased, so you're not talking about a capital lease.
Well, our police vehicles are actually lease purchase.
Okay. That was my main question. Then, you probably covered it before, but what was the, under, B part expenses, part of project 797, what is 797?
That's the number the state assigns.
Okay, it's just for, about $250,000. I was just wondering what that item was.
It's what's left in the total amount of the grant for the park. So it
then-
would be splash pad, it probably, at the time of this report, wouldn't have covered, the kayak launch went in yesterday, so it wouldn't have covered that coming out. But it's the remainder part of our party grant that we have to finish.
Okay.
And the 797 part is just the number the state assigns every grantee, each one gets a different number.
So that's just that same part of grant.
Correct.
Okay. That was it?
Thank you, ma'am. Anyone else? Yes, sir. Morning.
Mike Sullivan, 648 Ocean Boulevard. I was just wondering, maybe you can help me out. I've asked the question before, and it was dependent upon the commissioner's decision. But since, as one of the prior speakers mentioned, we raised the taxes by 45%, we're being reimbursed for Matthew to the tune of almost $6 million. There's a transfer of $806,000 from our revenues into the BOC fund. So I realize that only, the reimbursement can only be sent to the BOC fund. Is there any plan in next year's budget to take the reimbursement that we get for Hurricane Matthew to nullify any transfer from our revenue so that we can reduce the taxes or at least modify some part of the taxes that we raised last year to pay for the beach?
I had asked that question when we first heard of the FEMA reimbursements, and I was interested in, could we reduce the terms of the debt? Is that in line with what you were thinking about?
Well, I guess, I'll try to clarify. I guess the expenses, we have a transfer to help pay the expenses of $800,000. We're going to get a reimbursement from FEMA of some amount of the money. So if that $800,000 reimbursement comes in next year, it can be used to offset the BART, the expenses for BART and so forth. So I'm asking if we can use that as an offset instead of taking $800,000 from the revenue, taking $800,000 from Matthew, and thereby being able to reduce the taxes that the people, the property owners pay.
I'll answer that, and that answer is yes, because those reimbursements would be returned to the B part fund for allocation as the commissioners would see fit to do. That answer is yes, it can be used to pay for the Central Reach project.
Well, as I understood, I thought.
You can't, the question that came before us before was, can we pay down the debt early? The terms can't be paid down, but the annual debt service can be made out of the B part fund.
Okay.
Is that?
So the simple answer is we can offset the expenses by whatever amount of money we get as reimbursement that would have gone to the B-Part fund. In other words, if we're gonna take $800,000.
I'm gonna answer the question this way, is that the funds can be appropriated for from the B-Part fund to pay for the Central Reach project. Okay?
But I think you were also asking, could we reduce taxes as a result of that?
Yes,
You could, but then you wouldn't have any money built up in the B-Part fund for future storms. It's a question of, do you want it in the B-Part funds, or do you want it in the general fund?
okay. But, I got you, but
Or reduce taxes.
Or reduce taxes.
That's
so
the
the
question.
answer is that it.
But if you do
can
that,
be-
then you don't have any money in the B-Part fund for the next storm.
But it can be done, so it's a question of whether it will be done. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and it goes back to, and exactly right, it goes back to, you got a B-Part fund balance, you got a general fund balance, and you got taxes. And to answer your question earlier about, we had a fund balance reserve goal of 40 to 70%. So that, we have established goals in the very beginning of this process, we made them, and we're at 30 now, so we were at 19 last year, I believe. But so you have these three you have these three things, right? You can increase taxes, or you can shift money from B-Part to general fund to B-Part. Oh, and by the way, we're seeing some transfers from the sewer fund, water fund, so there's a lot of different ways you can shuffle the money, and that's, I think, was the goal too, to keep it as pure as possible, not shifting monies from one fund to another, just kind of keep it, if the funds are allocated for that. they
Yeah,
should
one
be
thing
kept for
needs to be said, that B-Part money has limitations on what it can be used for.
Yep.
So you just can't suck it out of that and spend it on normal operations of the town.
I forgot to mention one thing, if I may.
Go ahead.
This year, there are no fund balance appropriations from the general fund. There are no transfers from the water fund to the general fund. There are only transfers for that Central Reach project that represent the tax levy from the general fund over to the B-Part fund to pay for the Central Reach project. So those have been minimized.
And that's I would say that there's I have some questions about the transfer from canal dredging, and I think the math doesn't add up to me, the 50,000 and the
that's-
administrative and the legal, so we could, and then the other part is this the first year that the building off-site is being paid for by the water fund?
That's correct.
This is the first year. How was it paid for previously?
It was paid for out of the general fund, and then there was a transfer from the water and sewer fund to accommodate that, and that was.
Was it Was it 100%? I mean, was it?
We think so.
Okay.
As best we could approximate it. And the rationale behind that, whenever we financed that building in the beginning, I believe that we had to pay for it out of the general fund because it was originally funded as a USDA loan. And that was the way that it was originally financed.
And that's no longer a
We went
requirement?
with BB&T and
Okay,
an
we'll switch.
installment financing when we refinanced, and it's no longer a requirement.
Okay, so I like that, actually. I like, if that's the business that's taking place there, rather than transfer funds,
That's right.
let's account for it that way.
That's right.
Great, thank you.
All right, any more comments? Well, if not, I guess we're at number 3, and we, at the point, we're considering the possibility of a motion or a motion to adjourn. Or
I
what's
have-
the pleasure of the board.
I have a few other questions, actually.
All right,
One being, David, we talked about East End Beach Renourishment, Lockwood Inlet dredging budget item.
Yes.
I didn't see it. And I'll explain further, because you know, every once in a while, we do some dredging and some, I would hope the focus would be on East End Beach renourishment, like we did with the $76,000 with the Corps of Engineers. We also appropriated $35,000 to do some dredging that isn't doing beach renourishment. Understood you have to do that to get to the next step of dredging to capture that sand. But it's not been in the budget. You know, it's been requests throughout the year, and the couple of years that I've been listening and paying attention that's kind of a recurring theme. So I'd like to put in the budget $100,000 to recognize that expense, and also to show the county and state that we intend, which we always have, that we intend to participate in those programs.
Can I?
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah. A couple of things to consider is what you're talking about to primarily, in the upcoming year, provide funding for what I call the outer bar for the sidecaster operations, because the effort that puts sand on the beach from the inlet crossing, that only happens every 2 years, because it doesn't fill up enough to do the inlet crossing. So if it's primarily for the outer bar, the sidecaster operations, I think that the board, we've got some dialogue we want to share with you on that, and we don't know how deep that hole is as far as continually going to the well on the sidecaster as being the end all. You know, we're setting up and trying to get to where we put sand on the beach with whatever type of navigation effort happens out there. And don't take this as I'm discouraging the board efforts there. I just think that there's some information that you should be privy to or aware of in making that decision. We don't know how expensive that's going to be over the long haul. We hope that we're going to get to a point where that function is performed by industry and not the core plant that doesn't put sand on the beach. We want sand on the beach. That's, I think, is the most productive means of navigation maintenance out there. One thing that I want to put out so that everyone knows, the inlet crossing project that puts sand on the beach currently uses the least cost method of disposal to put sand on the beach. That's a tangible gotcha. You know, we can say that we spent $100,000 and got 100,000 cubic yards of sand. There's a commodity, if you will, that translates to sand on the beach. It is transportation driven, and I think that over the years we've relied on the Corps of Engineers to provide the transportation aspect of inlet and Atlantic Intercoastal Waterway maintenance out there. Transportation is outside the corporate limits of Holden Beach, is a function of the county, and I think that's something that has been missing in a lot of the different transportation planning organizations, to include the Grand Strand MPO that the town is part of. Also the county's regional planning organization for transportation. It has not been recognized as a mode of transportation. The water highways in Brunswick County, and needless to say, statewide, have not been recognized as a mode of transportation. Go figure. You know, there is, whenever you talk water transportation in the Grand Strand MPO, the only thing we get back is, oh, we can have a water taxi. Well, needless to say, y'all have seen the expenses that are involved, or the magnitude of expenses that are involved in maintaining the inlets in the waterway. It's infrastructure, and it's high-dollar infrastructure, and I just wanted to put that on the table to organizationally make it coherent as far as what we're talking about. The numbers are big. We think that for the state's shallow draft inlet maintenance requirements annually, there are 5 of them, that it's about $1 million apiece to maintain the state's inlets to their design depth and width. On an annual basis, that means it's $1 million a year for Lockwood Folly Inlet. And I know that there's a burden sharing arrangement, you know, we get money from the state, or there's a pot there. So in addition to providing money on a as-needed basis, there's gonna have to be an organizational fix to the maintenance for these inlets.
Totally agree with everything you said, but we have been providing money for both the inlet and the waterway, and as needed. My point is, instead of always on the fly, let's put it in the budget.
And that's fine. I would like to ask of the board, since the outer bar dredging doesn't provide a commodity, and our B-part funds, you know, we tax 6%, give the county a penny, and 2% of the funds go for beach nourishment, and 3% of the funds go for tourism related. If we use that money on a transportation function, is it the opinion of the board that you want this counted in our, because we try to rack it up and make sure that we're pure, that is a 3% tourism-related expense? Because it's certainly not putting sand on the beach. It's not sand on the beach like it comes out of the inlet crossing. Now later, as that would hopefully permutate into putting all inlet sand on the beach. But as long as it's not putting a commodity on the beach, it's hard to say that that's beach nourishment.
So, yeah, so.
From
accounting point of
from
view.
accounting standpoint, or a rack up, because, you know, there will be a question later on down the line that says or I hope that we would be able to answer that question if it should be asked.
Well, I would think that there's an element of tourism that we could account for from the inlet dredging because of folks who are going to be hopefully chartering boats to go out to the ocean. And we've heard strongly from the captains that, you know, it's worse than it's ever been. And I think that has a potential detriment to tourism. I mean, if there are other beaches that have navigable inlets, I would think they're going to factor that in if they're fishermen.
And this may be in the minutia. We've done a little bit of background research on tax base related to boats, because boats are personal property and boats are taxed as personal property ad valorem tax. And now this doesn't mean that everybody that has a boat lives at Holden Beach, but for those boats that are registered at Holden Beach, it is about, it's less than $1.5 million of valuation on those boats. That corresponds at the current tax rate to about $4,000, I believe. It was a little bit less than $4,000 on the yield. Now, does that mean that when folks come down here, that they use, you know, the canals and that kind of thing, keep their boats at the docks on the canals? That's fine, but that's just a data point that we have to consider.
Yeah, but as you said,
And it may not mean anything, but it's a data point, you know.
so as you said, you know, the first step is side casters, second step hopefully is to recover the sand. The other part is, you know, we're in the budget is actually $50,000 related to the same point, legal fees.
And those are the easements. That's to acquire the easements. for
Understood,
SDI
but
5.
in the same function as putting sand on the east end. So,
True,
you know, to my point, I think we should budget
okay.
the $100,000 to show that, you know, that we are planning on participating in those shared expenses in the future.
Well, David, you know, we were at the county commissioners meeting to where they had discussed, you know, allocating funding for shallow draft inlet dredging, and I thought I heard there that they had an interest in, you know, what we were gonna be doing in that regard as well. So they've taken action, as we've seen, and I agree with Mr. Freer that I think we need to demonstrate that, not only to the county, but to the citizens who came before us expressing their concerns, we need to demonstrate that we're also committing finances to the same end.
David?
But the actual goal is to put, the first is to put sand on our east end.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. That's-
David, we know that the normal dredging has cost about $150,000 in the past. 12.5 of that was our cost. We split 12.5 with Oak Island. Have you
Are
already
you
checked?
talking about the quarterly
Yeah,
expenses?
just the normally dredging out there. Have you already checked and know, or have a feel for what would it cost to have a dredge that's qualified to go out there and would pump it on the beach for us?
It would take a permit.
But you've got a permit.
I have a permit, I don't have easements.
You don't have, but you have a permit.
But we have a
So, but
budget.
do we know
we
what
have a
it-
budget to get these.
Do we know what it,
Yeah,
do we know how much more it costs to have a dredge out there that can in fact pump it on the shore?
you know, if I was able to project those dredge costs, I'd be in a different line of work.
Well, he's not asking
They're
to
so
project.
highly volatile that you really have to go to bid on those. I mean,
There's too many variables in that, like where is the dredge previous to the time that we need it? You know, is it 500 miles away, is it 10 miles away?
you know,
And all that, those things come into the bidding and you just don't know.
That's fair, but that's fair, but.
So
we
the
still
answer
gotta
is you
budget
don't know.
something to say that we want to do
I'm
it.
scared to say anything. You know, I'd fall back on historical precedents and go back to $1 million a year in 4 quarters, and especially when you start putting sand on the beach from the outer bar, then you're gonna have a different cycle time. You're not gonna need to do it every 4 quarters, so the variability increases rapidly from there.
But the state and the county would still participate with us on that, right?
Well,
If it's dredging, that
the
we have
law-
to take
the-
advantage of it?
the fund, the shallow draft inlet fund, is law. There's about $20 million
20 million,
in
yeah.
it right now. I can't speak for the county, definite commitment. You know, they have every time that we've proposed a project to them, piggybacking especially, they have participated. I would assume, and not to take license with Ann's money, but that would be something that's in everyone's interest and is really an easy takedown, especially when the state's paying 2/3 of the project.
I have a question in regards to commissioners talking about setting aside $100,000 a year or whatever. Are you talking about setting it aside from the B-Part fund, or are you talking about raising the town's taxes?
B-Part fund.
Be part fun, just,
Just clarifying your thinking.
Yep, no,
Glad
good
you
Just
good
clarified.
question.
reserving in the fund.
That's what he was
Just
talking about earlier, right, B part, for sure,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah,
I was gonna
I
close
didn't
that
want the
loop,
audience
thank you.
going out telling the public we're gonna raise, okay.
Yeah, I was gonna close that loop, thank you.
David, I have a question for you. When we're looking at the measurements of the general funds ratio, do we have a thing, we were like 17% last year? Is that right, about 17, 18%?
You know, I'd have to look back at
And-
I'd have to look at the audit to see what those.
Actually, 19.
19%.
Of the unassigned.
And we're projecting to go to 40% now?
30 unassigned.
30 on the unassigned. What else can we do to raise that? What are the options to raise that?
Um,
Cut expenses,
Oh,
raise.
well, you know, the academic answer, of course, is you can raise revenues or you can cut expenses, and I'll tell you about cutting expenses. I think that we run a fairly bare bones operation. Yeah, we may end up with $1,000 scattered across 15 pages of, in each line item, 15 pages of single space budget items that add up. But that really just falls back into fund balance, and the margin of variability on some of our revenue accruals, you know, really overcomes that, so it's minutia. On raising revenues, I'm not gonna say the T word. I do know that, I'm more concerned about protecting our existing revenue streams than I am about going and getting more revenue streams, to be quite frank with you. Our local option sales and use tax, recent legislation is gonna, you know, decrease that somewhere between $9,000 and $20,000 in the upcoming year, and that, you know, is reflected in the budget. There's always a move to reduce those state shared revenues, and as y'all are aware, those state shared distributed revenues are pledged against our special obligation bond for the Central Reach project. Now, we pay for it out of something else. I don't know what the implications on those revenues being decreased and how the bank will view that. You know, if our pledge is decreased, I don't know how that'll be construed. I think they only want to get their payment. They don't care how it happens, but I don't know how that will play out. So I'm more concerned about being able to hang on to our existing revenue stream, and I know that's a short-sighted answer, but I say it to illustrate the fact that we're getting outplayed at the State House. We don't have a presence available up there, and I know we've talked about lobbying expenses or having someone to go to that's at the back door of the State House. This budget, by the way, doesn't include that, and it's probably something that we need to consider to help us out along those lines. We're getting outplayed at the state level.
Do you have a handle on how much of the expenses that could have been in the general fund are coming out of the B part fund or the other funds?
Well, we've actually, it's the other way around, really. Now, we've taken, and one example, of course, is the emergency center that has been really trued up, and those expenses taken out of the water fund to include, we've taken it down to the minutia, and things like previously we were paying the insurance and bonds out of the general fund. Well, the biggest asset that the town has is the sewer system. So we've realigned those insurance expenses over to the water fund also, okay, to include the expenses. Another example of expenses that were coming out of the general fund before Whenever, and Chris will back me up on this, whenever the town first started putting trash cans out on the beach, there's about a half a dozen of them, and I'm taking license with what Chris says, 20 years ago. There's 120 of those trash cans out there now. That's direct tourism-related expenses. We were paying for the dumpsters on the beach trash, which is dumped 3 times a week, right? Dumped 3 times a week. It's the big one. Those are being paid for by the general fund. That's a result of us actually performing a functional review beginning last September on our entire solid waste system, and we dissected that thing down to the trash can level to discern where those cost centers were, where those costs, the correct cost centers should be. So those are exemplematic of things that were, it was the other way, John. It was other funds that should be paid for, not out of the tax base.
Right.
So it went the other way. We're pretty sure that things, is there something that happens in this building on the, that concerns the B Part fund that we don't, get down to that level? Sure. But we feel that we've got it dialed in better anyway, than it has been in the past. Now, can it be dialed in more? Probably. This is a fairly succinct, fund costing, though, I believe.
To that point, we talked about the general fund balance. Haven't talked too much about the B part fund balance. And I, if you do the simple maths, move $6,000 out of it, we're down to 3,000. We used 3 million. We used 3 million for the Central Reach. What was the fund balance before? What was last year? Was it higher than 6 million?
I believe the audit ending year amount was right at $6 million. I'd have to check.
So therefore we added no additional, from the last year, we added no additional B part fund balance.
Matter of fact, you decreased your B Part fund balance down to about $2.5 million.
So we
because
decreased it by $500,000.
No, you decreased it by about $3.5 million.
Well, I know, but the three we understand was for
Right.
Central Reach.
But 1.8 or something like that went to this county, right? Had to get paid to the county?
That's in gross amounts, you appropriated $3.5 million from your fund balance.
3.5, okay. So we're back to no increase. So it was,
That's right.
so we're not replenishing, so the point is, we're not, this
No.
past budget, we didn't replenish the B part fund balance.
No, you did not.
Right, which is not a good thing. But we did better on the general fund balance.
That's correct.
Okay. So therefore, that 6 million is really important that we start replenishing the B part fund balance.
Well, my comment to that is, there's a brand-new beach out there. Rentals are full, and the cash register are ringing. You gotta spend money to make money.
I'm with you, yep. But when it comes in, you gotta put it aside for the next time, yep. And there's a balance to that too.
David, I have a question for you in regards to trash. The budgeted amount versus the amount that we're under contract with the trash collection company. How much difference is there between what we're obligated to pay out contractually versus what's in the budget?
It was about a wash. It was
All right.
about a wash.
And that gets right to my point. We're talking about how much better business is and rentals and enjoying the money that's coming in and all that. We've got major problems with what way we're operating the trash collection right now. Speaking specifically and not solely, of the east end of the beach, whenever the trash trucks get down there, before 7 o'clock in the morning, sometimes before daylight, well before daylight. And the homeowners and the renters that are in those houses, that are leaving that day, of course, whenever they leave, they take more trash out than they do the previous day. And, not just the east end, but up and down the beach. I'm having to pay my crews with my dump truck to go out and pick up the town's garbage at many of the rental houses that we manage. And I'm paying for all that expense because the renters that are coming in have nowhere to put their trash as they unpack to go in the house. And I don't think that's fair. Now, some will snicker and say, well, that's the rental business, you're responsible for it. Well, if you feel that way, that's great, and I'm gonna continue to do it, I guess, because I have no option. But as we look at the budget, somewhere along the way, there ought to be some consideration to either, to see if we can amend that contract, hire additional help or something, because we have a problem. We're not satisfying the needs of the homeowners and the renters out there. We enjoy the money that comes in from them, but we're not taking all that good care of them. It's a health issue as much as anything else. And then those of you that say, well, put the trash out the night before. Well, I'll tell you what, you go pay your family members, or you go do it, or you do like I do, you pay your staff to go down there and pick up where the raccoons and the other critters are in it and scattering it all over the yard during the night. So I'm catching it both ways, and I don't know what the other property managers are doing, but we've got a problem. And, anyway, get
Yeah,
off my high horse.
I agree with you, Mr. Mayor. It's, Saturdays are not the best day to advertise the beach to the public because it's clearly a problem. There's trash all over the boulevard, not on the road itself, but all along the sides.
Sometimes on the road.
Yeah. So, we need to do something. And, you know, with the folks that we've hired now to do the rollbacks after the trash, I'm concerned that's a traffic hazard because that pickup truck is blocking traffic with their emergency flashers on. And, I know we used to have the golf carts, or I mean the ATV or whatever. That worked pretty well, I thought, because they weren't obstructing traffic. But anyway, there's a lot of things we got to do with,
I
to
agree with
manage
you.
it.
And-
I
But
think-
we were driving the golf carts up in people's private property, which created another issues that we got
Yeah.
complaints about, so
Yeah.
But a major issue we have is with recyclable. I'm watching, we're just two of us in our house, and every 2 weeks, we have the recycle can full. And there's just two of us. When the renters come with 10 or 12, 14 people in a house for a week, they will have more than one recycle can full of cans and bottles and papers. But most of them don't have the recycle. So they're using the 2 trash cans for a 4-bedroom house. It's just not enough. If everybody who rented was required to have a recycle can and people used it, that would mitigate a little bit of it in terms of having stuff falling out of the cans. But I'm not sure that two trash cans for a rental house of 4 or 5 bedrooms is nearly enough for the trash they generate within a week.
trying to stay on the subject, I guess it boils down to the amount that's proposed in the budget, will only take care basically of the contract that we have with the collection company. So there's no money available to do anything, whether it's recyclables or whether it's additional pickups or whatever. So you'd have to pull that from some other line item to adjust your services in the sanitation department. But anyway,
Well, what we can do is we can discuss it with, in the short term, we can discuss with Waste Industries to see if there's any margin for timing on the pickup, the pickup schedule. That's not something that I'm aware of that we've done.
Yeah, and another issue, which was touched on a minute ago, is that the trash trucks collecting on Saturday mornings, it's not unusual to have a line of traffic a half a mile long behind the trash truck, people trying to leave the island. And
I don't know if there's a solution for that.
Well, I was wondering if, I mean, I don't know, if,
Saturday's turnover day, so I don't know anything other than I don't really see how anything other than Saturday, having a Saturday dinner, I just don't, it's just my opinion.
Can you do it at 10 o'clock? People have to get off the island. I mean, that is the key, is when the trash trucks are up and down the road, and they come to West End, they're there at 6 a.m. So, I know how many people are not making that, get the trash out ahead of time. But the only solution to me, if you want to avoid the traffic and make sure things could get picked up, is to try for 10 o'clock in the morning. People are getting off the island, everything's in the trash, and then the trucks come in. But I'm sure that slot's taken by somebody else.
Well, I live
There's
over in
2,000
Canton.
homes and 9 miles of beach.
I live over in the county, and apparently the place industry must be stretched pretty thin, because, he pulls up at my house at 6 o'clock on Monday morning, that's my alarm clock. When I hear the wind.
Seems they're everywhere at 6 a.m., right?
But for us, on Tuesdays, it's later in the morning. It's only on Saturdays that they're at 6 a.m. It's their schedule.
That's probably, with it being turnover day and all that, that's probably the biggest pickup they have throughout the week. I would think probably, we can discuss it with them, and I'm sure they probably got a short period of time, so I think they like to have everything wrapped up at 5 o'clock that evening. I don't know if we can pay them additional funds, they put more trucks on the road or whatever.
well, it does seem to be the timing is the bigger issue than the additional trucks, because if they're picking up here on the beach at 8 a.m.,
Like,
Or s-
another issue, the biggest part of the issue is somebody having a can out there at 6 o'clock in the morning, and
all right, what's next?
David,
well, we do need, I think this is an urgent matter that we need to fix pretty quick, or before, it'll happen all through this season. So, I don't have a solution, but I think we need to take some action to assess it, and
David was talking about action. Do you have an action item, David? Are you gonna do something, or?
We've got a contract with them to provide a service, and, the only thing I know to do is engage in a dialogue to see if there's, to follow up, to see if there's somehow they can get out there a couple hours later so that the sleepyheads can get their trash down to the road on time. I mean,
when it starts later, he's gonna be adding more trucks to accomplish that, right?
I mean, trash will get you in trouble. It's what caused the downfall of the Roman Empire. There's one thing that I know about that: public health is a very important issue. I also, after going through this functional review on our solid waste system, it's complicated. When we're talking about coordinating, I said, "There's trash. Take the trash out." No, it's complicated.
well,
I think we need to be careful about performing a knee-jerk reaction to the situation until we can talk to waste industries. Greg may have an easy solution to it, or he may say, you got what you get.
I know why we do a Saturday pickup, but would a Friday pickup not relieve that? Because Saturday's the exchange day, coming and going. If they were required to have it out 6 o'clock Friday morning, we picked up on Friday, a little bit of their trash would be in the cans, but the new guys coming in would have a lot of room to put trash away.
Well, I will tell you something. I'll comment. The reason why we have trash pickup on the days that we have pickup is that has evolved to what works for Holden Beach. If we pick it up on Friday, where all the liquor bottles gonna go from the party Friday night that gets to stay there till change up till Tuesday or Wednesday for the new folks to have to smell. You know, there's a reason why we have it on those days, is that has distilled down to the solution that works for Holden Beach. Do we need to think about our service that we provide at a higher level of service? Is that what we're talking about here? Are we talking about having in-house trash, door to curb service? You know, we're not gonna solve that one at this table today, y'all.
Maybe it's just a matter of we keep it like it is, and then we just have a crew that at a certain point in the day goes back and they check after everything. So if there is a can left out that's full, they get it.
Well, what are we gonna do with the ones that we find that don't get done? We don't have the garbage truck, and Wake Industry won't come back and get it, it's just not out there, so. I'm with Dave, but that's pretty, it sounds simple, but there's a lot of,
But
I
is
mean-
that something that we could ask them to do, not us?
well, that revolves back to them, we have a
Yeah.
discussion with Greg Brinkley, and see if they got any kind of, even if it costs more, whatever, what
Yeah.
service they actually provide, because I would be sure that Ocean Island, Oak Island, and all those probably faced with the same issue. I'm sure he's probably heard it before, and we just see what they got to say and get your report back. It's really about all we can do.
Yeah. And our next meeting's fairly soon. Can you have that discussion and report back by the next?
Now, and remember, the busiest week of the summer is in our face.
Yeah, yeah, I understand.
So we
You know,
have-
I don't know what Greg's schedule is. I mean, we can ask him.
Okay.
Well, I agree, we're not gonna solve it here this morning, it's too late, but. Anyway, what's next?
I just have a couple other simple questions. David, we talked about the administration and legal fees in the canal funds.
What page are you on, Peter?
Well, you can go to 12 or 13,
In the canal dredging?
14, yeah. You know, those first two, administration and legal
Yeah,
fees?
And those are our programmatic placeholder budgets. All of those canal dredging budgets are, it's like that. I think that's 5%.
Okay.
And really, they only come into play when we execute a dredging project. So, like if you look at this year's budget, I think that the total canal bill that we spend out of the $1 million that's escrowed is like $4,000, and that's surveying
Okay,
stuff.
so those are just in
really-
case-
Those are placeholder,
Okay.
those are placeholder line items. that
How do
we-
they relate to the line on page 2, the transfer from canal dredging, the 50,940?
It's
Or
the
do they relate to
it's
it?
the total of all three of those line items in the different canal subdivisions.
Oh.
That reflects back over in the general fund revenue. And normally that transfer is not made either because there's not any, effort expended other than some marginal housekeeping effort from the administration.
That's what I thought it was, but my math or your
exactly what
math
it
is
is.
wrong on that one, so.
So if there was no dredging,
Those 6 items don't add up to the 50,000 is my
It
point.
should be 3 items.
Well, no, your legal and, the 3 definitely don't add.
it's legal and admin for each of
Legal and
the,
admin times 3
for each of the.
don't add up to $50,940.
Well, there's.
That's why I couldn't figure it out.
The admin and legal don't correlate to the transfer, the transfer at all.
Oh,
That's,
I thought
legal and admin, there's no correlation between the two of them.
So if there's no canal dredging this next fiscal year, that 50,000 would transfer back to the canal.
It never gets made in the first
Right,
place.
so it's, all right.
And I only have one last comment, actually. So on the last page of your capital, you know, you have the $2.5 million for terminal groin. I think I'd like to see an asterisk or something, because there's the following years, and there's a huge expense related to that capital item every year. Potential, every year, there's significant
On
expense
page 2,
related.
where is it at?
The very last page,
Uh-huh.
17. I'd almost like to see an asterisk against that 2.5 million over the following years, because I understand that maintaining and related to the terminal groin is not capital, but there's significant expense related to that capital item in the following years.
It may not be any.
May not, they may not be any, but that's what what the document says so far, there's gonna be significant expense related to that. Understood?
No, I just found the $2.5 million. Okay, what,
So I understand that the following years after, there's no capital, but that one capital expense triggers the probability of what we've been told so far. I know we haven't gotten the report. So, I mean, if you're gonna put the 2.5 million in there with no report, let's put an asterisk saying that there's gonna be a significant expense the following years related to that $2.5 million capital.
well, I don't know that.
You don't know the 2.5 million then?
Well, I got a $2.5 million from the engineering report.
And we've
That's
got,
the cost of it.
a 30 million across 30 years from the same report. So we can't have it both ways. You gotta put it in or not put it in.
Well, is the 30 million dredging related to the east end, or is it related
It's
to
related to the
It's ready
terminal
to
groin.
go on. It's the
Is it?
I don't,
they-
that's what the
well,
report says
that's
so
what the
far.
report says, is there's gonna be renourishment costs, or whatever you call it, to backfill the sand behind the terminal groin.
All I'm saying, it's kind of misleading with not, because it's 2.5 million, but it has significant expenses related to it in the future years.
Potential significant,
Right.
not,
Well, it's budgeted, right? So that's what the report's telling us.
So how would you like that done?
I'd like an asterisk against that, and you got plenty of space below to explain that over the next, related to that capital item, there's, and you can find a number. I thought it was 30 million over 30 years to maintain that capital.
So it'd be $1 million
Expenditure.
a year. You could just put $1 million for each year after that for potential
Expense.
maintenance expenses.
Right.
conversely, there's no measurement of the savings we're gonna enjoy potentially because of the lack of erosion due to the presence of the terminal groin.
This could all be put in with the right statement and say that the situation is currently still under investigation, review,
It's an unknown,
Yep.
either way.
I understand that, but I know he just wants a caveat in there that there is yet to be precise potential expenses.
I don't
and-
care what you put in there.
Yeah, that's all. It's a plan, so it's not that, but it's just to balance it out.
I'll find something in the final EIS as a source,
Yep, perfect.
quote on that.
Great.
Anything else?
Well, we discussed at our workshops establishing a 5% budget item for sand fund, my words. And I know we're talking about fund balances and trying to increase those. And I hear that the budget is bare bone now. But fortunately, we are realizing growth in revenues. And I understand that I'm anticipating if I ask, can we establish today a 5% budget line item for sand fund, that we're gonna say, well, it's gotta come either cut expenses or raise taxes. That said, I think that we need to establish a firm goal for replenishing our sand renourishment fund, and strategically, we need to plan for that by setting the goal of a 5%, so we can avoid, as best we can, having to raise taxes again if we have a major storm that wipes out the benefits from Central Reach. So what I would like us to have is to address it strategically, and for every increase in revenue that we enjoy against increase in expenses, we allocate that to a sand fund. That way we have institutionalized budgetary pressure into our process to where we've said it's a priority for us to allocate funding for beach renourishment. And when we're planning ahead for budgets, that is automatically factored in. So it's not, you just aren't starting with, we had X amount of growth in revenue, X amount of growth in expenses. So the difference is we're going to allocate it here, here, and here. I think we need to establish it as a priority for that difference to be allocated as a sand fund. You understand what I'm saying, Mr. Hewitt?
I understand strategically. I don't understand quantitatively in the budget how that can be done in this budget.
I understand that.
Okay.
That's why
Okay.
I prefaced all of my statements on.
Okay.
But what we're lacking still is a strategy to establish that as a priority going forward. Because I think with most organizations, there's a natural tendency when you have an increase in revenue, that revenue is typically spread to expenses. And I'm not making a judgment on how we have done that in this budget, but I'm saying going forward, we need to change our paradigm to where if there is a balance forward of revenue, when you've subtracted expenses, we need to allocate more to a beach renourishment program. So I don't know if you can do it in a capital improvement plan or
Well,
a resolution.
is what you're really talking about is the leftover money at the end of the year, dedicating that to beach renourishment? I mean,
That-
your your plus balance, that would be 5% or whatever it may be, that would, or you could say all revenues left at the end of the year goes to beach nourishment. I mean,
Well, as I was proposing it, an increase in revenue realized in current fiscal year, minus your increase in expenses, the balance of that be allocated to a fund balance, to a beach renourishment program.
and are you talking just the B-Part fund?
No.
Or are you talking
I'm
the
talking,
general fund?
I'm talking about the general fund. The B part, I would like that managed separately because, well, let me ask this. Do you get an increase typically in revenue in the B part funding year to year? If you do, then.
It's been a gradual creep. It has been
Okay.
a gradual creep.
Then it would be both funds then. As you're getting an increase in net revenue, I would like us to establish that as being allocated for beach renourishment.
So what you're actually talking about is an inter-fund transfer from the general fund to the B-Part fund for all revenues that exceed expenses at the end of the year.
Yes.
Just for the general
But,
fund.
but you're, but tell me if I'm understanding this. But within B part, you want a line item that says sand renourishment.
Yes. And a transfer from general fund would go into that line item.
Right. Right now, B part is, how many line items? We want one specific one that says
Okay.
sand renourishment.
Okay. Well, I don't know how to do the math on that. Okay, because one is a function of the end as of the end of the year leftovers, and the other one you're programming 5% of two funds. So what is the 5% a function of? What's the number that it 5% is a function of? Am I being obtuse or am I just not seeing it?
We also,
No, I was presenting it as
I'm trying to figure out how to do it.
conceptually. I understand that's the next question, but that's what I'd like for you to,
Doing 5% of the accommodation tax that we collect?
I'm doing,
To the
as I,
different
as,
line, or are you?
you have line items throughout the budget by category. Year to year, those revenue streams, if you have an increase, which we do year to year, as, for each one of those categories of the budget, you also have an expense category, correct? That you budget for. That's what we got in this budget. I would like for the, this is a strategic initiative. If we have growth in revenue, once we have budgeted the necessary expenses, I would like the balance of that to go toward a beach renourishment fund with a goal of 5% of the general budget.
Each year of 5%?